Hey everybody. All right. So I don't know if this is going to record my video or not, but hopefully it does. As we talked about, or as we covered in our last video, we set up the spine. Primary axis is X. The secondary axis is Z. So what you want to do is try and maintain that schema throughout your rig as much as possible. So what we're going to do in this video is we're going to cover the arm. So the SPY, again, has some cool problems to solve. One, the arm isn't straight out. It's kind of down at an angle. We have the added complexity that it's bent. It's not even straight. And then we've got the additional fun of the hand actually being slightly rotated off the center. So it's kind of rotated backwards slightly. So a lot of fun stuff to tackle. So I'm going to show you how I like to approach this. So let's get started, shall we? All right. So for this, I'm going to start with the front view. So you could click. So I'm going to create a collarbone, a shoulder, an elbow, and a wrist joint. So I'm just going to do from the collarbone down to the wrist. We'll worry about the fingers in another video. So because of all the weirdness that's going on, here's the way I like to do it. I'm going to just create some joints. I'll tell you what, kind of give you the overview, and then we'll walk through it. So I like to create the joints, get them oriented correctly, and then get them moved into position. This way I can make sure that the orientation is solid before I even start trying to get things to where they need to be within the model. So the way I go about that is I go to skeleton, create joints. And then what I'm actually going to do is just create my joints in a straight line, just right across the x-axis. So I'm going to click once. There is my clavicle. I'm going to hold the shift key down. Boom, there's my shoulder. Boom, there's my elbow. Boom, there's my wrist. And I'm going to hit the enter key. And you can see them over here in your outliner. Not named correctly, but we'll get there. Given the tools that we created in class, and I'll make a video for creating those, that's pretty straightforward, although you could really just Google it. It's probably faster that way. I'm going to select the hierarchy, and I'm going to toggle on local rotation axes. So boom, just like this. And you can see how they are. Now you can see their orientations, just like we did with the spine. So I'm going to switch to the perspective view. And what I'm going to do now is check to see, are they oriented the way I would expect? Again, an adducting motion brings it towards the body. Abducting is away. So away, I want to be negative values. To, I want to be positive values. So I'm going to select the base, and I'm just going to rotate it down on the Z-axis. And you can see that it's a negative value. So that's not what I want. I need to get the Z flipped. So instead of pointing in the positive Z-axis, I'm going to undo that really quick. Instead of it pointing in the positive Z-axis, as you can see down here, I need to be pointing in the negative Z-axis. So here's how we're going to go about that. We're going to go back to our trusty tool, the Orient Joint tool, and click on the options box. And I'm going to uncheck Orient Joint to World. And we're going to set these values up. So primary axis, X, right? We've covered that. Secondary axis is Z, so I'm going to select that. And I know that I need it to go in the negative Z axis. So I'm going to click Z and then change this to negative. And I'm just going to go ahead and have it orient all the joints the same way. So orient the child or the children joints. It's going to stay selected. And then I'm going to click apply. This will leave the options box up because I still got some orientation to do. So I'm going to click apply. You can see how all of these joints are now set up. except the last one, right? Because it doesn't have a joint to orient to. So what we're going to do is have it orient to its parent by clicking the orient joint to world and then click apply. And now you can see that all of these joints are oriented the same way. I'm going to go ahead and uncheck this because I'm going to have to do that here in a second. And I'm going to test it out, right? So again, make your changes, test, make your changes, test. Don't make a lot of changes only to find that you screwed up somewhere along the way and then you've got to backtrack. That's painful. So for this one, I'm going to just rotate down. And you can see over here in my channel box, it is a positive rotation value. So I know the opposite's going to be true. So we're squared away there. Collarbone or the clavicle is that one. That's golden. I'm not going to worry about that too much. Shoulder, same thing, right? It goes up and down. I mean, it goes forward and back as well. Since the range of motion, right? So the range of motion, right, for your shoulder is it goes forward really, really far, back not so far, because you've got a lot of skeleton stuff going on in the background. So it doesn't go back as far as it goes forward. Same thing, although it does go down as much as it does go up. This is kind of where I choose the shoulder to be sort of its primary rotation, which means I don't have to do anything with that joint. So good for us. And now the elbow, though, is a different thing, right? Because it doesn't go up and down like this. It rotates like this. So the Z-axis needs to point in the different direction. So I know it's not going to be X, right? Because X is already taken up. And I know it's not Z because that's not the way that elbow, because that would be this. So it's got to be on the Y axis. So going back over here to my joint orientation tool, it's X, right? Z is the same. Only this time I'm going to hit Y. And I know because the Z axis had to be in the negative Z to give a positive rotation the way I want, I think it's going to have to be in the negative Y to give me that rotation that I want anyway. So I'm going to set this to Y. I'm going to leave this at negative. And I don't want it to affect any children. So I'm going to click, although I don't think it would in this case, but I'm going to uncheck that. And then I'm going to click apply. And now you can see that the orientation for the elbow, for the Z axis is now facing in the negative Y axis. So let's test it out. And if I rotate again on the Z, you can see that it's a positive value. So I know I'm good to go. And then I'm going to go to the wrist. And again, your wrist does this all right, but it does this a lot better. And so what I'm going to do is just kind of follow the same paradigm I did for the clavicle and the shoulder. And so just double checking, if I rotate it on the Z down, it gives me a positive Z rotation. So I know that's good to go. So let me go ahead and add these joints to this layer. So I'm going to close the orient. I can close that now. I don't need that. So again, I'm going to, in my outliner, I'm going to select the first joint, shift select the last joint, go over here to my joints layer, right click and say add selected objects. And now they're this god awful lime green. So I know I got it right. And now what I need to do is start moving these into place. So when you are especially having to like move joints around, at least initially, sometimes it can get a little confusing. But at least right now, I think we're okay to leave the selection tool. Right now it's set to world. I'm going to select this to object. Even though we're only going to be actually moving or translating this clavicle joint. So I'm going to move the clavicle joint into place. In this particular case, it doesn't really matter. So I'm going to leave it to world just so that we have a consistent understanding here of how I'm moving this relative to the world. So I'm going to move this down. Again, I'm going to go to the front view, get it roughly where the clavicle might be. Doesn't have to be perfectly exact, but that's probably a good ballpark. You can use skeletal reference to if you really want to dial in and get anatomically correct. Then I need to just make sure that it is placed inside the geometry and that, oops, and that it's ready to go. So that's probably pretty good. So now I need to get the rest of the joints in place. So if I go into my channel box, you can see that rotations are 0, scale is 1, and the translate values are all well, they're exactly what we expect, right? There's translate values there. But I can't move the second joint because orientation is really, really important. We want to make sure that the x-axis is along the line to and from its child joint. So if I move this, watch what happens to this orientation here. If I move it, you see the orientation doesn't go with it. If you double click on the move tool, there is this joint automatically orient joints. Stay away from it. Just don't. Not until you have a much better understanding of rigging and you've done this for a little bit. It can throw you off, and like when you think you've got a thing set up right, if you use that tool, it'll reorient your joint. Doesn't give you a warning that it's doing that, and then you're going to find out probably later down the line that it's no longer oriented the way you thought it was. So how do we get these things into place? If we can't move them, how do we move them? How do we get them where we need them to be? So we're going to be using rotation and scale, because those are the translations that will zero out when we freeze transforms. So we're going to do this by, I can go to the top view here. Oh yeah, I forgot. Now maybe I can do this. Let's see, orthographic, new top. Does that give me anything? Yeah, it did. Good. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select my clavicle here, and the shoulder's like right in here. So I'm just going to move this to where it's kind of pointing in the right direction, like this. And then I'm going to use scale, and I'm going to scale this up, and you can see this joint move into place. But you'll notice by scaling and rotating, I'm not losing any of my orientation. So if I'm going to click on the front, and with the same joint selected, I'm going to rotate it down. And you can kind of see how I'm getting this into place. And then I'm going to scale up a little bit further. There we go. And then I'm going to pop into my perspective view and make sure that's kind of where I wanted it to be. Groovy. And if we now look at this joint that I've got selected, the collarbone, if I look at it in the layer editor or channel box, the channel box editor, you'll see that it has rotation values and scale values. So we don't want those when we're done. So, but what we can do is we can actually freeze those transforms, and you can actually just do freeze all because it won't touch the positions or the translate anyway. So we can actually do freeze all. Watch what happens too. This is kind of cool. You can do freeze all, snap, and you can see like all this popped in, rotation zeroed out, scale is zeroed out, and you're good to go. This is in place. Same thing with this one. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to do the exact same thing. I'm going to just try and get this lined up a little bit. So here's the other deal. And this is something that I kind of covered in class, is that when you're trying to get your joints into place, you try to make sure that they are perpendicular to the plane that you want them to rotate in, right? So like, for example, with the hand, if I wanted it to go up and down, the Z-axis needs to come in and out of the wrist. Hopefully my video changes. Otherwise, this is going to maybe sound weird. But you're going to want the Z-axis to be parallel to the wrist. So that's when I talk about plane, that's what I mean, right? So you'll want the Y-axis to be up, going right through the wrist. And if you looked at it from the side, it would come out straight. Like if this were the plane of the hand, you would want that Y-axis to kind of be sticking out. So that's the thing to keep in mind. And I'll show y'all how to create a plane to help you out. Like if you're not, if it's kind of feels weird. But what I'm going to do for right now is just try and get this elbow joint roughly into place. So you can kind of see the first thing I normally do is just try to get this where it's aligned roughly with where I need it to go. So this is roughly in the direction that I need it to go in. Then I need to actually rotate it on the X to get this, make sure that the Y-axis is where I want it to be. And I can use this, you can see the Z line, this blue line. I can use that to try and kind of rough in what I need it to do. So just trying to get this stuff lined up a little bit. And then I'm going to go ahead and scale to maybe try and bring that joint down into the elbow. Actually didn't do too bad of a job. Then I'm going to rotate it back a little bit. And again, I'm just kind of looking here. I don't think that's quite right. I'm going to move this over a little bit so that when this moves, when this joint moves, the shoulder joint moves this way, it kind of, the arm swings naturally to the way that it's currently modeled. So also, if I look at it from the front, does this line point straight down into the to the elbow? And it's pretty close, but I think I can do a little bit better. There we go. That's pretty good. And then does this line point down to the elbow where I want it to be? Close. I'm going to move it back a little bit. And again, you want your elbow joint to be slightly towards the back. When you do the knee, you do it slightly towards the front of the knee. This is so when we get later, when we start doing our IK solvers, it just kind of makes things a little bit easier on you. So now that that is in place, right, we've got scale and rotation values for the shoulder joint. And we can get rid of those by doing our freeze transforms, which we created a little tool for in our class. So we're going to use that. So I'm going to click that. Boom, gone. Perfect. Now we're going to do the elbow to the wrist. And I'm just going to rotate this again. Just try to get this. I could go in from the side here, but you kind of see how these axes don't exactly line up. This is kind of part of the fun of the Spyrig. So I'm going to move this sideways a little bit so that this line kind of is sort of straight up and down with the way that this arm is oriented. That looks pretty good. And then from the front, I'm going to try and get this axis here to align to the wrist. And then I can actually go in and just scale, try to get this joint as close to the wrist as I can. I'll put it right about there. And you can see here that it's not quite there. So I'll move this here. Gonna move this back. That's probably pretty good. But I don't like how you can kind of see where this feels a little canted a little bit from the line of the arm. So using the x-axis, I'm just going to rotate this back a little bit. That looks pretty good. The other thing that I will use with the elbow is I'll just kind of look to see, like from the side, is since the z-axis is the kind of the secondary rotation, you know, does it look like it's going to work properly? And what you can do is select that joint and then rotate it on the z-axis and see if it works the way it looks like it's supposed to. It looks a little off, right? It looks just a little bit off. So I'm going to rotate this back a little bit, rotate it this way. There, that looks pretty good. Maybe just a hair. Sometimes you can just really over noodle these. Yeah, that was a little too much. So that's good. That's pretty good. I'm happy with that. So, and of course, this joint now has rotation and scale values. So I'm going to use our little freeze transform button and clears that out. And now you've got your joints in place without having to lose the orientations with each other. And everything is zeroed out. If you're ever not sure, you can use our tools in combination. So if I select the root and I say select hierarchy, or use our select hierarchy tool, and then freeze transforms, that's not a bad way of making sure that everything works the way expected. So again, right, test. So I'm going to select the first joint, shift select the last joint. I'm going to select rotate Z. And then in the channel box editor, I'm going to select the name. I'm going to hold the middle mouse button down in the viewport and then drag left and right. And let's see what happens. So if I go in a negative value, what we should see is this should move away. This should also move away. And the elbow should extend out. So again, let's try that out. Boonk. That looks about right. And then if I go the other direction, which would be positive, the elbow should, you can see all of this stuff goes in and the elbow does exactly what we would expect it to do. And you can always just kind of do these on the onesies if you're not real sure. So that is how we get the arm joints in place. Hopefully that makes a lot of sense. We've put the arm joints into place. We've allowed them to maintain their orientation, and we zeroed out the transforms to make sure that they were ready for for prime time once we actually get them in the game. So that's about it. Again, if y'all have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. Thanks a lot.